get on each other's nerves?
Yes.
Good Lord, no.
Really?
No.
Well, we shout and argue and fight and work it on out, man.
I don't know, we understand each other very well, we're very tolerant with each other. But there are a lot of things unsaid as well, I feel.
But we're happy together, we don't work.
Any problems or strains?
Yes, of course there are.
How do you get around them?
We pretend they're not there.
Pink Floyd, a band of visionaries that pushed boundaries in ways that hadn't been done before. They created some of the most iconic albums in music history. Yet, beneath their success, a storm of internal conflict and bitter disagreements boiled. This is the story of how a band that crafted one of the most unique sounds in music history ended up on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide. This is the story of Pink Floyd.
Okay.
2, 3, 4.
Why has it all got to be so terribly loud? For me, frankly, it's too loud. I just can't bear it.
1965. After 2 years of shifting band members and multiple name changes from Sigma 6 to the T-Set, an unknown London band finally solidified around 4 core members and changed their name to Pink Floyd. The name was inspired by 2 of band leader Syd Barret's favourite blues musicians, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. At the time, their musical repertoire mainly consisted of rhythm and blues songs, but already in 1966, the band gradually drifted towards Barrett's original compositions, marked by a strong progressive influence. They experimented with long instrumental excursions and expanded the concert experiences with light shows and coloured slides. By 1967, the band secured a record deal and released their debut singles, Arnold Lane and See Emily Play. These tracks not only introduced their unique sound, but firmly established them as a rising force in the rock scene. Only few months later, they would release their first album, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. With all but 3 tracks written and sung by frontman Syd Barret, the album gained widespread acclaim, showcasing his distinctive vision and the band's emerging sound. But behind the scenes, the picture was different. During this period, Syd Barret began to mentally withdraw, increasingly turning to LSD. Band member Nick Mason described him as completely distanced from everything going on. Barrett's state would even worsen throughout the year. They were forced to cancel shows, and their first US visit was cut short due to Barrett's condition. By late 1967 and early 1968, Barrett's erratic behavior made it too difficult for the band to continue working with him, leading to a mutual decision for his departure. With Barrett gone, the responsibility for songwriting and creative direction shifted largely to Roger Waters and Rick Wright. However, amidst this challenging period came a pivotal moment for the band: the introduction of their new lead guitarist, David Gilmour. In the years that followed, the band focused on defining their new identity in the post-Barrett era. Their second album, A Saucerful of Secrets, was released in 1968, primarily written by Waters and Wright, yet it still featured some of Barrett's final contributions to the group. They followed with albums like Ummagumma and Atom Heart Mother, and although the latter received great critical acclaim, both Waters and Gilmour expressed negative opinions about the album, with Gilmour commenting, "We were at a real down point. I think we were scraping the barrel a bit at that period." Following the album tours, the band went through a period of heavy experimentation, struggling to find a fresh direction. However, this would soon change. In 1971, they released Medal, widely regarded as the first album where they fully realized their musical potential. Seen as a bridge between the Syd Barret-led era and the new Pink Floyd, Medal became one of their most pivotal works. Though later albums would be shaped by distinct personal visions, Medal was a true collaborative effort that facilitated the runway for Pink Floyd's future success. There was great optimism within the group.
What do you think makes Dark Side of the Moon so special and to give it that longevity?
I haven't got a clue.
1973. Pink Floyd experienced unprecedented success following the release of The Dark Side of the Moon, widely regarded as their greatest album of all time, and their first true concept album. The concept of creating an album unified by a single theme was originally suggested by Waters and quickly approved by the other members. The album focused on the pressures the band faced from their demanding lifestyle. Though Roger Waters wrote all the lyrics for the album, the musical compositions were a collaborative effort from all members. The group worked very efficiently with the recording, at least when they weren't watching football or Monty Python. As Gilmour put it, when we were on a roll, we would get on. The group's dynamic appeared to be both harmonious and productive. However, after such a monumental triumph, how could they possibly top it? This was an underlying issue that affected the creation of their next album, Wish You Were Here. They were both physically and emotionally drained.
There was an awful lot of absence, an awful lot of people not really quite being there in this post-Dark Side of the Moon period.
Following weeks of lack of creative direction, Waters finally started to visualize a new concept, heavily influenced by the rise and fall of their former bandmate Syd Barret, which coincidentally happened to visit their studio during the recording, but now in an almost unrecognizable state. Despite having found a new concept for their next album, the mental absence within the group would slowly start to strain their relationship. The recordings suffered more friction than that of the Dark Side of the Moon recordings. Although Waters wrote the lyrics, Gilmour contributed hugely to the album with his instrumental solos. But according to Waters, there was specifically one incident that marked the first real fight between him and Gilmour, namely whether or not the songs Dogs and Sheep should be included in the album. Waters, who ultimately got his wish granted, wanted these excluded, as their themes didn't align with the album's focus on absence.
Really, the beginning of the end of the band was Wish You Were Here.
But it was only the beginning of the end. After claiming huge success with Wish You Were Here, the band would go on to create their next album, Animals, which featured both dogs and sheep, which had been left out of their previous album. With the exception of Dogs, which was co-written by Gilmour, Waters composed all tracks for this album, and it was the first album not containing composer credits for Wright. By now, the tension within the group grew even more. According to Wright, Waters started to see himself as the reason why the band was still going, and started to believe that he was the sole composer of the band. Tension escalated rapidly, and it seemed all chances of collaboration were slipping away. Yet one unexpected, and perhaps from a fan's perspective fortunate, incident somewhat forced the band to work together for a little longer. By September 1978, Pink Floyd, despite their huge commercial success, was having financial problems. Due to negligent investments by their financial planners, the band was facing a financial crisis, which led to the band urgently having to produce an album to make money. Prior to this, the band had just finished their In the Flesh tour, also known as the Animal Tour, in which Waters' behavior during the tour had sparked an idea for their next project. Waters felt a growing distancing between the band and the audience, driven by scale, corporate avarice and ego, which even had led him to spit on one of their fans during the final concert of the tour. Waters himself was horrified by his own behavior, a feeling of self-imposed isolation as he called it, which eventually became the base concept for their next album, The Wall. While Roger set out to write the material, Gilmour and Wright were both working on their own solo projects, while Mason was helping musician Steve Hillage to produce an album. Waters then presented the band with two options, the first being about a man's dream about family and promiscuity, whilst the second option was a 90-minute demo with the working title Bricks in the Wall. The group settled for the latter. The former would eventually result in Waters' first solo album some years down the road. It was obvious that this was Waters' work, heavily based on personal reflections, as well as him exhibiting a controlling force during the recordings. This seemed to deter the other band members' motivations, especially Rick Wright. Their relationship broke down and they were hardly in the studio together. Wright didn't contribute anything to the album according to the rest of the group, which even annoyed Gilmour, who stated that his lack of input was driving us all mad. This quarrel ultimately resulted in the band giving Wright an ultimatum of leaving quietly, in which he accepted. However, it's worth noting that he was hired as a session musician for the following The Wall tour. Now, despite the immense commercial success of The Wall, which included the album, the film and the tour, the band's future was more uncertain than ever. With Wright no longer in the group, the wall between Waters and Gilmour was gone, leading to immediate clashes over the direction of their next album, The Final Cut. Gilmour felt many of the tracks on the album were not worthy of contribution, whilst Waters accused Gilmour of not contributing anything himself. The album, which initially had the working title Spare Bricks, included unused material from The Wall, as well as some new material Waters wrote. The new material was heavily influenced by his view on the Falklands War and his father's death in the Second World War. Although Waters and Gilmour initially worked together on the album, they would soon work separately while their relations worsened. Gilmour was even left out of the credit list as producer, but was still paid royalties.
Roger had one idea of how he thought the album should be, and a very strong idea of how he wanted it to be. And I simply thought he was wrong.
I don't see any future for the band.
Why?
Because we don't want to work together anymore.
This seemed like the inevitable end of Pink Floyd. At least, that's what Roger Waters believed.
Speaking of legal hassles, I understand we shouldn't ask you about Roger Waters' departure from the band.
Why?
After the final cut, Roger Waters was done with the collaboration. He wanted out, and more than that, he wanted Pink Floyd to be finished, declaring the band a spent force creatively. On the other side, Gilmour told Waters that they would continue the band without him. Gilmour was especially eager for the band's continuation, given the relatively bad perception of his solo face-off tour. Gilmour, Mason and CBS Records even threatened to sue Waters to compel him to stay on and write another album with the band. However, that would not be the case. Instead, Waters went to the High Court in an effort to dissolve the band, without luck. Gilmour responded by publicly announcing the continuation of the band. Their disputes would eventually be settled outside of court. On Gilmour's houseboat, the Astoria, they settled on an out-of-court agreement between the parties. In an interview in later years, Waters said he was wrong about the lawsuit and said he had failed to see Pink Floyd's commercial value as a brand.
I did think that was wrong, and I was wrong.
Were you?
Of course I was.
The band then set out to create their next album, A Momentary Lapse of Reason, but now without their lyrical mastermind. Gilmour, now taking over the songwriting ropes, struggled to get on. He experimented with songwriters such as Roger McGough and Eric Stewart, but settled on Anthony Moore, who eventually became co-writer for several of the songs. Gilmour decided to leave the idea of a concept album, and instead use a more conventional approach with little connection between the songs. He felt that the recent Pink Floyd albums had placed too much emphasis on lyrics over music, and he aimed to restore that balance on this album. The album sold well, reaching number 3 in both the UK and US, and Gilmour viewed the album as a return to the band's top form. However, Waters had a different opinion. I think it's facile, but a quite clever forgery. The songs are poor in general, and Gilmour's lyrics are third-rate. Even Wright, who had been temporarily employed for the album, stated that Waters' criticism was fair and that it wasn't really a band album. With the band establishing a new lineup for the following tour, and special effects more impressive than ever, Roger Waters was touring his new solo albums, The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking and Radio Chaos. However, by this time, Waters truly felt the lacking power of the Pink Floyd brand. His solo tours were a completely different life than what he was used to.
When I was in Cincinnati and I was playing in a 3,000 or 4,000 capacity arena to about 1,000 people.
Whilst the Momentary Lapse of Reason tour went as usual.
And the very next day, the chaps were playing to a sold-out show of 70,000 people in the Colts football stadium.
But there was only one question everybody seemed to care about. Will we ever see the complete Pink Floyd performing together again?
Read my lips. I'm not going to talk about it.
In the years following the breakup, the feud between Roger and the remaining Pink Floyd members gradually quieted down. After the Momentary Lapse of Reason tour, the Pink Floyd members had busied themselves with various personal projects. That was until they decided to start working on their new album in '94, Division Bell. The album received mixed reviews, but was commercially highly successful. It was a product of the collaboration of all Gilmour, Wright and Mason, with Gilmour writing most of the lyrics. As for Waters, he was occupied with his own work. In 1990, he staged one of the largest rock concerts ever to be held following the fall of the Berlin Wall. The show was named The Wall, live in Berlin, and featured some of the biggest rock icons. And although many people were hoping for a Pink Floyd reunion, Waters did not ask any of the remaining Pink Floyd members to participate. In 1992, he released a new album titled Amused to Death, which he later claimed was highly undervalued, even going so far as to say it was better than Wish You Were Here. Fast forward about 10 years, there had been little activity from Pink Floyd during that time. But that didn't stop Bob Geldof from working his magic behind the scenes. Bob Geldof, the lead singer of the Boomtown Rats, was the driving force behind the iconic 1985 Live Aid concert, where he helped orchestrate major rock reunions, including Led Zeppelin. And he was now, in 2005, organising a new charity concert, Live 8, a benefit concert in London raising awareness about poverty. Geldof, knowing the band well as he had played the character Pink in their The Wall movie from 1982, reached out to Gilmour about a reunion for the benefit concert. However, Gilmour quickly declined the offer. Geldof then called Mason, who again contacted Waters. 2 weeks later, Waters reached out to Gilmour, which was enough for Gilmour to change his mind. At last, over 24 years since their last concert, the prime Pink Floyd were finally back together. The band highlighted the unimportance of their problems in the context of the benefit concert. Although the rehearsals and the concert went very well, the group was not open for a further reunion, even declining a contract worth $150 million for a final US tour. However, they did not rule out the possibility to reunite for future special events, which wouldn't be too soon. Only 1 year later, former band member Syd Barret passed away, which brought the band together once more for the Barret tribute concert Madcap's Last Laugh at the Barbican Centre in London. This is often cited as the last complete Pink Floyd concert. That is because only 2 years later, band member Wright would die of cancer in 2008. Waters and Gilmour would in 2010 play together again as part of charity event for the Hoping Foundation, raising money for Palestinian children. Gilmour also accompanied Waters' performance of The Wall by playing Comfortably Numb. Mason also joined in on tambourine on Outside the Wall. Although Gilmour announced the disbandment of Pink Floyd in 2006, he and Nick Mason would in 2014 go on and create one final Pink Floyd album, The Endless River. They said that the album mainly was a tribute to Wright, as it even included several recordings made with Wright during their Division Bell sessions.
I think Rick would be thrilled, actually. I think this record is rather a good way of recognising a lot of what he does.
The relationships between the band members appeared to reach a relatively harmonious conclusion. Or was it?
David thinks he owns it. I think he thinks that because I left the band in 1985, that he owns Pink Floyd.
It turned out that the relationship between Waters and Gilmour still wasn't all flowers and sunshine. In 2018, Mason said that he remained in touch with both Gilmour and Waters, whilst the two were still butting heads. The group was supposed to release a remixed version of Animals, but it was heavily delayed until 2022, as Gilmour and Waters couldn't agree on the liner notes. Waters was also frustrated, accusing Gilmour of trying to take undue credit for their earlier work and protesting that Gilmour wouldn't allow him access to Pink Floyd's social media and website. Their disagreements were further fueled by the group's wish to sell their back catalogue in order to get rid of decision-making, and the arguments arising from keeping the catalogue going. But this was not the wish of Waters. In 2023, Waters released The Dark Side of the Moon Redux, which was a new version of the album featuring spoken word sections and no guitar solos. The idea of the recreation was partially inspired by his thoughts on what the wisdom of an 80-year-old could bring to the album. But now the feud between the two legends had gone way beyond musical matters, and the confines of the band, it had become a matter of geopolitics and war. In March 2022, Gilmour and Mason reunited as Pink Floyd to create the song Hey Hey Rise Up as a response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. However, shortly after, Waters addressed the song in the German newspaper Berliner Zeitung, saying, "I have seen the video and I am not surprised, but I find it really, really sad. It's so alien to me, this action is so lacking in humanity. It encourages the continuation of the war." Waters further stated in another speech, "The invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation was illegal. I condemn it in the strongest possible terms. The Russian invasion of Ukraine was not unprovoked, so I also condemn the provocateurs in the strongest possible terms. The only sensible course of action today is to call for an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine." His comment on the invasion being unprovoked spiked huge criticism in the media. And shortly after the statement, Gilmour's wife, Polly Sampson, posted a tweet responding to his comments. "Sadly, Roger Waters, you are anti-Semitic to your rotten core," she wrote. "Also a Putin apologist and a lying, thieving, hypocritical, tax-avoiding, lip-syncing, misogynistic, sick with envy, megalomaniac. Enough of your nonsense." In which Gilmour retweeted and added, "Every word demonstrably true." Whilst their relationship seems to be worse than ever before, it is, and has been for a long time, quite clear that the Pink Floyd era has truly come to an end. We've been incredibly fortunate to have been gifted Pink Floyd's music over the years. Ultimately, it's their incredible body of musical work that defines the band, despite all their clashes and different personalities. In fact, that might be precisely what made their music so remarkable.
We had a great career together. It was fantastic. I look back upon it with huge pride.